Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome today to the next session covering the Learning Outcome 4 on the unit Personal and Professional Development. Thanks so much for joining in. And for those of you who are joining us live on YouTube, you should be able to see my screen and obviously the video. And if you're not able to, just please raise a hand and I will ensure that you are able to, effectively tune in to this session. Couple of things that I want to do before I start. One is basically looking at doing a quick recap in terms of what we've covered so far. So let's look at learning outcome 1, 2, and 3 that we've done so far in this unit, wherein we've understood what is self-managed learning, what is the difference between self-managed learning and lifelong learning, and what are the benefits, of self-managed learning and lifelong learning for an organization, and how do organizations look at marrying their goals and objectives into the managed learning for most of their employees and individuals which work at a workplace or in an organization. In the second one, we went on to doing a bit of our own SWOT analysis and skills audit, wherein we looked at understanding our current skills, competencies, which are required at our place of work. We also looked at marrying them with the organizational objectives. And then we looked at our developmental needs, which typically were then firmed up into what is called a personal and professional development plan. Now, in the third learning outcome, we basically looked at reviewing, one, first of all, implementing that plan, second, reviewing that plan to ensure that, the activities that we are putting in place are activities that are able to help us in completing and achieving those goals and objectives which have been set in the PDP. Now, PDP is a working and a living document, as I mentioned earlier. And in this document, what we do is from time to time, we generally look at reviewing this document to see what we've achieved, what are the gap areas. And this is continuously done with the help of SWOT analysis that we do, and also reflection on, what we've learned and how we've gone about doing that learning. Now, we also look at taking some feedback from our peers, our colleagues, and, within the organization to see if we are able to reflect accurately and honestly on the objectives which have been achieved or the tasks which have been set. And one of the acronyms which I use, which is the SMART objectives that we need to use to be able to set our goals and objectives so that they are specific, they are achievable, they are measurable, they are, realistic, and they are also time bound. You're looking at putting a plan in place which helps you improve, helps you gain that skill, helps you get knowledge, and helps you make overall productive and more efficient at your place of work. So that's the whole idea of having a PPD or a personal and professional development plan. Now, if this PPD is reviewed by your colleagues or by your manager, line manager, then obviously in organizations, in that case, this is also termed as career professional development or CPD document. And obviously from our aspect, what I've done is in the previous learning outcome, I have shared a template for SWOT analysis, for skills audit that you need to do. And both of them then inform and obviously help you in the creation of what is called a PDP, which is what is required for the completion of learning outcome 3. Now, in the last learning outcome, today we are going to be focused on understanding. Here, the learning outcome is basically be able to. That means we need to be able to demonstrate. That means we need to create evidence to show how do we look at, acquiring interpersonal skills, and how do we look at, essentially looking at, solving work-based problems. So when we talk about, learning outcome 4, and we talk about, the purpose of understanding what is interpersonal skills and what are transferable skills, we are going to be looking at 3 assessment criteria. One of them is going to be focused on understanding what are work-based problems. So when problems arise at our place of work, what do we do? How do we go about solving them? How do we go about resolving them? And that is where we need interpersonal skills like communication, understanding, negotiation, tactfulness. We could use an n number of skills depending on the situation to actually come to some sort of a solution for that problem. We are also going to be looking at understanding in the second assessment criteria, how do we communicate effectively using various styles and at appropriate manner at various levels. So sometimes this is something which comes to your mind is sometimes when you're discussing or writing to your boss, you write in a particular tone or voice, you write in a particular fashion. You are sometimes writing or asking for information from different sources, and that could be done at the peer level, at the colleague level, and you write in a different way. And sometimes you look at writing to senior people, or you're asked to prepare at your place of work what are called management report or board reports, and obviously there the communication and the style of your communication tends to vary. So in this aspect, what we're going to be looking at is how do we look at communicating at various styles, using variety of styles. And obviously styles would mean verbal communication, non-verbal communication, written communication, and within that you have formal, informal types of communication. So we look at various examples through which we can and we communicate through using these mediums at various levels within the organization. And last but not the least, we're going to be looking at focused on understanding what is time management, how do we look at managing time, and what are effective time management strategies. So this is a practical learning outcome in which we have to be able to demonstrate that what we have learned so far in the unit in terms of understanding our skills, understanding our SWOT. By conducting skills audit and doing our SWOT, we need to understand what are our interpersonal skills, what are our transferable skills, and then use them to be able to address some of these assessment criteria. Now, what I want to do is obviously for the discussion of this particular learning outcome, I'm going to switch over to a presentation, which is what we're going to do is basically discuss through these slides some of these assessment criteria and also look at in detail, about understanding some of the key terms within, this particular learning outcome. So what I want to do is start off with three different areas. One is problem identification and solution selection. The other is communication, and the third being time management. Let's look at going into some of the basic things which we need to understand first, which is to look at what could be the typical problems that we face at work. Now, there could be a whole lot of things that we have and in terms of problems that or issues that we face at work. Sometimes it's best to document them or use a word called challenges, because on a day-to-day basis, we are given different tasks, different job responsibilities to perform by our managers or somebody who leads the department and the team. And sometimes some of these jobs and tasks throw off what are called challenges. Now, what could be these challenges? There could be n number of different types of challenges depending on the organization that you work in, the kind of work that you do, and at your place of work, depending on whether you work in a team, whether you work alone, whether you work in a branch office, in the head office, things like that. I have listed out a few here, possibly think of things which are challenges that normally come up at some stage or the other when you're working within the organization. Now, one of the best things that I could start off with was look at communication challenges. Now, there are, sometimes issues, conflicts, or, let's say, areas of conflict which arise because the communication is not clear. So these all tend to fall into what are called communication challenges. There could be challenges if you're a manager, you're working and you're managing a team. There could be challenges sometimes that you face wherein you have low engagement from your staff on certain aspects of your job or responsibilities that you're giving. And then you generally feel that the motivation with the staff is low. So as a manager, you're expected to deal with one of the challenge, which is low engagement and a lack of motivation at the place of work. It could be sometimes dealing with people which are difficult in general. Sometimes you have customers, you're dealing with situations. And sometimes, the best example that I would give here is if some of you who work within the front end of the organization or deal with customer services or providing customer services to customers, sometimes you deal with difficult customers who are not willing to understand, not willing to budge. And, it is generally very difficult to deal with those people. And that is where this particular challenge could also arise. Sometimes you see that if there are issues and problems which occur and there are lack of, results that can come out of it, they could be, classed as wherein you would say that there's a lack of conflict, a lack of resolution in terms of that conflict. And there are not many, solution or areas that you can come up with which allows you to look at solving or resolving that problem. Then problems sometimes do occur when we do see that, in some cases wherein there is lack of skills, there is lack of professional growth. You generally see within organizations, staff becomes frustrated. You sometimes become frustrated in your own role, in your job role or day-to-day activities that you're doing. And these could be because there is lack of development on a personal basis or on a professional basis, and you feel you're doing the same tasks again and again. and you're not getting the kind of growth that you would want to see within the organization because you perform well, you're completing the tasks on time, you're achieving the goals and objectives set by the organization. Now, one of the other things which I can also think of is, sometimes you have issues which could be because of technology and innovation. When things change within an organization or the introduction of a new technology, if it happens, you would generally see that there could be problems which could occur at place of work. Things like networking problem, you have a problem with working of a PC or a Windows, assuming you're a Windows user and there's a new Windows operating system which is installed by the IT on your PC and you arrive the next day in your workplace of work and you boot your PC and you see, okay, things are not working, or my data is disappeared, or it's interacting differently, and they could be concerns or challenges which could be thrown up by change of technology, or things which are being done by the organization to increase effectiveness, productivity, efficiency in general, and they could be related to innovation or change management which is being done. One of the key things which most organizations are grappling with today, for example, in the NHS, we look at the problem of disposal of PPE, personal protective equipment. You look at environmental issues in terms of, most companies, businesses producing a lot of waste, and that going across and to waste or landfills, and that is creating, problems in terms of environment. Now, when we look at environmental issues, a lot of companies have corporate social responsibility and they have some sort of an agenda to implement that. But when sometimes you look at in your own place of work, if there are issues in and around the environment, that means the office conditions in terms of place of work, they are not very conducive. Say, for example, if it's too hot, if it's too cold, you could have issues which could arise because of the challenges that you're facing at your place of work in terms of your own personal space. People are being seated too closely together, or for example, issues which would mean that there are no proper resources available in some areas, things like this water dispensing machine or toilet facilities. And these could be typical problems that employees, as staff, as individuals, you could face when you're at your place of work. Now, what we also want to be able to do is primarily look at understanding, how do we go about solving some of these problems. So when we know that these are problems which occur and we can face at our place of work, what we also need to look at is understand how do we go about looking out for solutions to solve these problems. Now, one of the things that we look at is communication solves, majorly all the problems. So if there's an area of conflict, or if a conflict arises, then typically, sometimes it's best to talk it out, and talking or looking at the problem or giving the person, their share of voice allows you to solve those problems, because sometimes employees feel that they get, their voices get repressed, or they essentially do not get enough airtime, as I call it. So in some cases, it is helpful in order to resolve some of these problems is to give all employees some sort of airtime, and that would allow learners, or in this case, employees, to come or arrive at some sort of resolution. Now, what we also want to do is understand in some cases that when we look at problems which arise or conflicts which arise, they could be also arising because of the differences in cultural background. It could be because of the individuals not getting a proper induction to settle within a particular role or their job at their place of work, and these would require obviously intervention with relevant people within the organization in order to ensure that they receive the proper training, proper induction to be able to start doing their job roles. So in some cases, you as a manager would act as a facilitator. In some cases, you would collaborate with your colleagues in the HR in order to try and come to some sort of resolution or resolve some of these conflicts. Now, we also talk about time management issues within the organization, and this is a let's put it this way, this is a very common issue or a challenge which comes up within organization, because given the work to be able to complete within a particular time frame, sometimes results in you not being able to deliver the work on time. And when this happens, you generally get remarked on by saying, it's poor time management, or, in terms of if sometimes work does not get done, and if it's something which happens time and again, then it says, you are not reliable in terms of delivering on time. So in order to avoid these kind of things, time management is considered quite vital and important within most organizations. And some organizations look at imparting training to their staff, colleagues, and employees in general on how to manage time. So poor time management can be a challenge, can be an issue. And in order to solve this, what we have to look at is most managers, most department heads, most colleagues who manage or supervise employees always look at using and let's say they always look at using what are called SMART targets. And these targets, when they're assigned in tandem with discussions with their colleagues or peers to ensure that they have a buy-in to these targets, the goals and objectives, to be able to complete those targets or achieve those targets. And in those cases, it tends to be, looking at what time is available realistically, and what is the timeline in which these tasks can be achieved. So sometimes you would look at morning briefings within an organization. You would look at managers sending out emails to ensure that the work gets prioritized for the day. And in those cases, the idea of doing that is primarily to look at managing time. Sometimes employees are asked to multitask, and in those cases, tasks have to be divided in order to ensure that they are spending appropriate amount of time in order to complete those tasks. And hence, essentially, time management sometimes becomes an issue within organization if you have too much work, or if you have too much work pressure to be able to deliver things on time. In those cases, time management is required, or the essential element of managing time is required in order to ensure that the tasks and jobs and responsibilities are completed on time. Some of the other bits that I will quickly go into, and these could be issues that we face, and how do we find solutions to these, is say, for example, one of the key things which comes up is, because most of us, let's face it, work within organizations today wherein you have to at some point or the other work as a part of team. There are departments within organizations. If you look at the NHS, there are lots of different departments which work together to be able to provide service to the patients. So when we look at coordination between these departments, they can become an issue sometimes. And there are lots of different types of trainings which the NHS puts in place to ensure that various and different teams within the NHS work effectively to be able to deliver service which is patient care or care to the patients in general. Now, in some cases, this could be communication, or this could be, for example, this could be related to the fact that here what will happen is that if there are gap areas in terms of communication, if the message sent by the person is not understood completely by the other person on the other side in the department, then this can lead to lead to issues or creation of conflicts. Sometimes you can get no response because the communication has gone to the wrong person. And in this case, you keep waiting, obviously, to get a response. But because the communication has not reached the person correctly, you don't get a response from that person. So in those cases, normally most surgeries operate what is called the walk-in surgery in the morning. Now, if you need to take an appointment, what tends to happen is that you would call the surgery, and the nurse or the receptionist would pick up, and he or she would essentially then try and give you an appointment for that day. Now, if you call outside certain times, and then if there are scheduled number of appointments available, then if those appointments are already taken, then you have to look at calling the next day. Now, one of the key things which the receptionist does in terms of coordination is to ensure that the appointment is done correctly with the particular person within the practice. Now, if it is an appointment related to, say, for example, you want to come in and get a check done, it has to be with a clinical nurse or it has to be with the doctor. Now, if there was an appointment for repeat prescription, these are things which they can manage, or one of the clinical nurse can manage, and that would mean that could free up time for the doctor to be able to see other patients. So here, coordination that they do is critical to the effective working of the surgery, And in some cases, they would pass on inquiries to the practice manager. If it is something that they cannot resolve, there's an issue, there's a conflict, the customer, or in this case, a patient is complaining, then the practice manager steps in. If there are bits and pieces that they can get on with, they would normally, provide that information to the client or the patient who's calling up. And in some cases, obviously, they will look at booking the appointment. So they play a very critical part in terms of coordination between, say, the doctors, the nurses, the healthcare assistant, the clinical nurses at the surgery. And this sometimes, can bloat up into a service issue, because if you don't get appointment and you keep calling and you wait for about 30 minutes and you find out that, okay, time is run out or today's appointment is run out, then in some cases, customers or patients, who've been waiting in and have called can, become a bit impatient, and obviously they would want to complain. And in such cases, the receptionist or the person dealing with that responsibility then passes that on to the practice manager, and they would look into it. So the coordination plays a very effective role, when we look at trying to resolve problems that we face at our place of work. Communication of schedule. Now, this is something which I've put in as a practice, because I've seen in a lot of small companies, organizations, sometimes things are firmed up, targets are given, goals are set, but their communication does not happen to the team downwards in a way, in a fashion which needs to be done. Now, sometimes meetings happen, informal meetings are happening, documentation of these meetings are not done, and what tends to happen is that it is assumed that everybody is aware of the targets or the goals and objectives which have been set. So sometimes scheduling some of these tasks in a way wherein all employees get access to that information, all members of the department of that particular department get access to that information, is also vitally important. And hence, I would put it this way, that one of the problems that does get addressed if communication of scheduling or scheduling of, say, for example, a rota in a care home is done in advance or 6 weeks in advance, that helps to plan, say, for example, employees wanting to go on leave, taking, days off, or if in some cases, helps them also plan their bit in terms of, the number of hours or the shifts that they would do. And these tend to be some of the, solutions that work-based problems that we face can be looked at, for the purposes of solving, because we are able to effectively communicate. We are able to, say, for example, deal with some of these on a basis wherein they can be dealt with by discussing, and also ensuring that relevant people are aware of, are made aware of, these problems, so that they can then step in to solve them. So I hope the assessment criteria 4.1 is clear. If there are any questions, feel free to ask me through the chat room. Let's quickly look at the assessment criteria 4.2, which talks about communicate in a variety of styles and appropriate manner at various levels. Now, this is something that we're going to borrow from the managing communications unit. There are different styles through which we can communicate: verbal, non-verbal, written styles. We also sometimes communicate through body language, visual signs, or signals that we sometimes use when you're sitting in a room, when you're getting into a place and you don't know somebody. Your body language, the way you talk, also, and the way you behave in that room also gives out certain signals in terms of what you're communicating and how you're communicating. Now here, what we're going to be doing is basically focus on written styles of communication. And what we're going to do is look at 3 examples of how do we use written communication to communicate things at the appropriate level. Say, for example, if I'm writing to one of my juniors or one of my staff to be able to get hold of information, how do I write that? If I'm also communicating with my boss or somebody senior in the organization, I'm using a formal writing medium to communicate, and that could be a letter or an email. And in some cases, if you are a part of a group meeting, or if you've called a group meeting and you're discussing things with colleagues, then what we want to be able to do is evidence something, which it could be something like a minutes of the meeting. And here what we are looking at is the person who's being asked to draft or take is the meeting minutes taker would be looking at certain amount of skills, which is effective listening skills, to be able to make sure that everything which has been discussed in the meeting is captured and then is circulated to all the employees or all the people relevant for that particular meeting in order for them to understand the objective of it. So when we look at non-verbal communication, sometimes, a lot of things that we don't say, the way we stand, the way we behave, the way we are, in terms of our body gesture, it can communicate a lot of things, when we look at nonverbal communication. So things like crossing your hands, putting your hands in your pocket, or for example, not meeting or having an eye contact. In some cases, crossing your legs while you're standing, or if you feel you're not, nodding too much, or for example, if you're shaking your leg. All these are examples of, body language, and in some cases, nonverbal communication that you're doing inadvertently, or whether you're aware or not aware, and that is sending out signals or, signs to people who are observing you. Now, looking at, specifics of, you asking for certain information, say, for example, from your boss or, somebody senior in the organization. So here, sometimes what you do is you would see a branch office would write to the head office, or in some cases, if you're working as, say, for example, you work in a care home and you're writing a letter, an official letter to seek information from the CQC, or for example, a body which basically deals with standard, you would write an official letter. And in this case, when you write an official letter, you're going to be drafting it officially in the sense that this letter would primarily have your address, would have the date, their address that you're writing to, and obviously you'd use formal means through which you'll say either dear sir or madam if you don't know the name, and if you know the name, then dear Mr. or Miss and the last name. And then obviously you're telling, you're focusing on, telling a story in terms of what is required, what is the intent of writing, and what do you expect, this letter of communication to deal with. And then you end it towards the end by formally using yours faithfully or yours sincerely, and you sign it off. So this would be a letter asking for information from a superior, wherein it's a formal form of communication. And this style would, wherein you're writing dear sir, madam, and you're not addressing somebody by the first name, would be because you're writing to somebody senior enough in the organization, or somebody, if you're writing a letter to a standards, authority seeking some information from them. Now, sometimes you're writing a letter of complaint. So it could be, I'm giving you an example here. You could be another evidence or, style that we would want to use would be for this particular task would be, say, for example, there is an issue or a complaint which you want to make, and this issue or a complaint you want to write formally. So again, a formal letter. And in this case, that, style of writing would be formal, wherein you're focused on facts. You're looking at, in the opening paragraph, writing about the problem or the issue that you're facing. In the next paragraph, you're defining or basically describing the complaint or the nature of the complaint. And in the third paragraph, you're asking or suggesting a solution that you would want to be provided. And in this case, towards the end, you clearly end the letter by saying, you clearly end your message by saying in the letter, what is the intended action that you would perceive that the organization or the person, or in this case, the relevant authorities needs to do. And this would be, again, a letter wherein you're using negotiation skills, you're using some of your, skills to be able to get the information or get to a resolution, which is what you intend to by writing this letter. The third tends to be, say, for example, you're writing to your colleague and somebody who's junior to you, and you're basically asking them to do a job, asking them to, or you're delegating a particular job. For example, you want to hold a group meeting or an annual group meeting, and in this case, what you're asking one of your staff to do in the department is to basically formally start making inquiries to book a venue wherein the annual meeting or the conference would be held. And in those cases, you're still writing a letter or an email, and the person, in this case, you can write an email, obviously, and in this case, what will happen is this will be slightly informal in terms of the style. And you would say, okay, could you find out and look into suitability of a few venues where we could hold our annual conference, and ask about the relevant dates, budgets, and various options that you would want the colleague to find out. And in this case, this could be a letter of booking. Now, sometimes when you look at writing letters, what you would also be looking at doing is essentially dealing with using some of your interpersonal skills. Now, what are interpersonal skills? These are skills that we use on a day-to-day basis. We could use them to communicate, interact with other people, both individually as well as in groups. And they tend to be skills which primarily would, would be skills like, for example, we are aware of people around us, we care about people, you're looking at collaborating, you're looking at, communicating. You have skills which primarily help you get out of a problem, face a challenge, and they tend to be what are called the interpersonal skills. Now, these skills could be skills, for example, if somebody has been asked to take the minutes of the meeting and you know shorthand, you are basically an active listener in this case, and if you're the minute taker in that room, then using one of your skills that you have, which is being able to take minutes of the meeting, use shorthand, this would be also described as an interpersonal skill. If you hear a bad news or a news which primarily is a news of somebody, say for example, passing away or some sort of an issue happening with your colleague, then in those cases what you would look at is you would show empathy and understanding from a point of view of, you would show empathy and, understanding from a point of view of dealing with that particular person. And in those cases, you would look at, dealing with the person appropriately. And, this would allow you to essentially, use your empathy and your understanding skills. So when you look at, dealing with, say, for example, different set of peoples, within the organization, when you're dealing with people at a different level, what you will generally see in most cases would be that sometimes, you have to use your skills, which are called interpersonal skills, to be able to engage, understand, listen, and, so, for example, in this case, when you're dealing with somebody and what you're looking at doing is using, your interpersonal skills like communication, problem solving, listening skills, your negotiation skills, the ability to be able to, say, for example, deal with people. And those would be, skills which are termed as interpersonal. So they could be things like leadership. It could be something like problem solving. It could be something like people are able to you're able to build trust with people quite quickly. You have a lot of confidence. They will all be classed as what are called interpersonal skills. Now, the other side that we look at, the other word that I mentioned very briefly at the start of this session were things like, transferable skills. So when we talk about transferable skills, these are skills that, people are able to use, and they basically, maybe these skills could be skills that you're developing over a period of time, and this could be skills that you're basically looking at gaining because of your work experience, because of the experiences that you had at the place of work, situations that you faced, and then these skills can be transferred or used in another function, another job, another sector, and there these skills and abilities help you to adjust in those, say, let's say a new job or in a particular place of work, and they allow you to adjust comfortably, and they would be termed as what are called, transferable skills. So when I look at transferable skills in particular, we would be looking at things like communication. So you would, over the years, learn lots of things, how to communicate, but at some stage, these skills will become transferable because you would be able to use them at all places of work or other areas of work, and they would be termed as what are called transferable skills. Things like analytical skills, problem solving skills, critical thinking or reasoning skills, computer and IT skills, these are skills which you can transfer from one of your job roles to the other, and they would be termed as what are called transferable skills. Now, when we talk about, transferable skills, we also talk about transferable skills in, health and social care. Now, when we talk about some of these transferable skills in health and social care, we talk about, skills which are specifically related to person-centered approach. Things like, for example, caring, persistence, patience, ability to be able to look at the 6 C's that we generally talk about, in the, let's say, the health and social care sector, things like communication, things like empathy, time management, taking initiative, adaptability, flexibility in terms of your, approach to work, looking at networking, looking at taking initiative, and obviously at the senior level, looking at things like planning and organization, looking at management and leadership, they will all be termed as what are called transferable skills. Now, one of the things that you would have noticed is that when we draft our CVs or update our CVs, we put this down in our CVs as my transferable skills, or when you write skills and then you also write transferable skills. So when we look at these skills specifically in the health and social care sector, with people working within the sector like nurses, midwives, doctors, dentists, healthcare professionals, you would typically look at transferable skills being skills like people skills, dealing with people, knowledge about certain areas of your work. You would be looking at skills which could be related to organizing and managing, administrative skills, things like the NHS IT system, for example. If you work within the NHS and you've used the IT system, you know how to use the system to create health records, to manage health records, to retrieve information about a particular client. Look at some of these areas by looking at use of IT or PCs in particular. They would be classed as information technology or IT skills. And then you have skills which could be because of your academic or vocational qualifications. They could be practical skills. And these skills, sometimes, if I have to give an example, these skills could be things like people who work as electrician, plumber, painter, decorator, carpenter. They have certain practical skills and they have done some qualifications in the background to be able to, get, let's say, acquire these skills. And that is what they put it to use in their day-to-day work. And they would be termed as what are called practical skills. Now, housekeeping skills, which are, if you look at healthcare assistants within hospitals and care homes and nursing homes, one of the key skills which HCAs or healthcare assistants have is basically housekeeping skills, which is to keep hospitals clean, reduce chances of infection, catering skills, which could be seen with dinner ladies or in restaurants in particular. One general skill that I would say, which could be a practical skill is over the years, which I've gained, is gardening skills. And this could be to, basically look at maintaining a garden or a food, bit of a food patch that you have at your home, and they would be termed as, practical skills. So when we talk about skills in general, we talk about skills which are, transferable skills and skills which are interpersonal skills. And then sometimes you also come across terms which will say and divide some of these skills into either hard skills or soft skills. So when we talk about hard skills and soft skills, hard skills are skills which are teachable. They are the abilities or skills that you acquire over a point in time. Soft skills tend to be people-related skills or interpersonal skills. So if I put this across as saying that we look at soft skills is another word for interpersonal skills, things like communication, flexibility, adaptiveness, self-confidence, time management, teamwork, being able to work within a team. These are what are called interpersonal or soft skills. But when I say hard skills, these are skills which could be acquired over a point in time because of doing a course or because of experience of working for a number of years within a sector, and they allow you to get information or knowledge about certain areas, and they would be termed as hard skills. So for example, if I've done a degree in medicine, that is a hard skill because I've done this through an academic route, I've achieved a qualification, and that's a hard skill. Learning a language, for example, could be a hard skill. Sometimes when you look at, typing, we all use PCs every day. So if we look at typing, initially when you would have started off, we were a two-finger typer, but over a point in time with practice, what we've seen is that our typing speed has improved. You don't look at the keyboard that much, and that's a skill that you've gained over a point in time, and that is a hard skill. Programming could be a hard skill, for example. So some of these skills, if you attend, say, for example, a training session to operate an MRI scanner or an X-ray machine, and that is because you've attended a training and you've now got certified to be able to operate that as a machine operator or as a person who's capable of operating that machine, that would be termed as what is called a hard skill. So any questions on the assessment criteria 4.2, please feel free to ask me through the chat room. Now, the last one that we want to look at is how do we understand what is time management? Why is it important within an organization? And what are the benefits of time management, and how do we go about managing, time effectively, because time is limited. And when we have to do jobs or complete jobs, or complete and achieve goals and objectives, they are all quantified against or measured against time. Now, it's an easier way to define time management is that, it's a process of organizing and planning so that you're able to divide your time between different activities. Now, if you're given a lot of tasks, or you know that you have a number of tasks to be able to complete on a working day, what you would do is basically, sometimes what we do is, on a practical basis, we create a to-do list. We write it down on a notepad to say, okay, these are the tasks that I need to do. So when we talk about some of these, skills, we talk about some of these skills from a point of view of understanding that we will need to divide our time in a way wherein we are able to prioritize it according to what is important and what is urgent. Now, this is something that we will also look at when we talk about the Eisenhower's urgent important principle that he came up with. And in that principle, what we basically saw was that he talked about what is urgent and what is important, and how do we classify these as two different forms of activities. Now, before I get into that, let's look at quickly some of the benefits of good time management. Now, when we talk about good time management, we talk about things which are related to, greater productivity, efficiency, managing time effectively. Would also look at lowering your stress. You have a bit of a better reputation, and that could be because you're always able to deliver the work on time or before time. It leads to chances of advancement. That means if you're performing well, you're doing things well, you're making objectives meet, and you're achieving your goals within an organization, that would mean you are on the path to progress in your career, because people generally see you as somebody who is able to who's dependable, somebody who's reliable, somebody is able to given a task and complete it in time, even if it means taking a bit of stress, but you're able to deliver the tasks on time. Now, when we look at time management and when we look at time management strategies within organization, these are bits that most organizations want their employees essentially to look at. And sometimes it's a case of looking into understanding that what is priority, how do we set priorities, and how do we look at addressing those priorities by looking at doing things which are important because they're urgent, and doing things which are urgent and important. Now, one of the things which was we look at is how do we decide on what is urgent and what is important. So this is termed as the Eisenhower's urgent and important principle. And he, when we look at, why he came up with this particular idea is because it helps you understand your priorities. It helps you determine what activities are important and what are essentials and what could be distractors in terms of doing those activities. Now, sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, we create our to-do list. We look at tasks that we set out to do. And the idea there is to try and clearly segregate those activities or those tasks and list them down as priorities, list them down as activities which are urgent, list them down as activities which are important and essential. Now, Dwight Eisenhower, the person who came up with this, while he was giving a speech in the early in 1954 to the Assembly of World Council of Churches. He was the former US president. If some of you don't know, Eisenhower, was the US president. And what he did was he came up with two kinds of problems: the problems which are urgent, and there are problems which are important. Now, he said that you have to deal with both these problems. The urgent problems are not important, and the important ones are never urgent. So this later came on, to be known as what is called the Eisenhower principle. And he helped, this principle basically helps organize workload and priorities. Now, this is used as one of the important principles to understand time management, because if you have to be effective, you also have to be efficient. And in other words, if I say this, that we must be looking at spending time on things that are important and not just the ones which are urgent. So you need to be able to balance it out in the sense that we need to be able to classify and define what are important activities and what are urgent activities, the two pillars of this particular principle. Now, important activities are activities which have an outcome that lead to us achieving the goal. Now, these could be personal or professional goals, but important activities are activities you don't want to miss out because they help you in the achievement of your goals. Urgent activities are activities which can demand immediate attention. They are usually associated with somebody else's goal, or could be associated with someone else's goal. And they often are the ones which ask you to concentrate, they demand attention. And sometimes, because of you're dealing with them, the consequences of dealing with them in terms of results may not be immediate. So when we look at important activities, these are things that I need to do on a day in, day out basis. If I don't do them now, obviously they will lead to, or they will still be piling on my desk, and those are things that I will only need to do because they are important and they are related to my achieving my own personal goals or professional goals. Urgent activities tend to be activities wherein you get involved as a part of a team. You're called into, maybe rescue, or called in to contribute your ideas to a particular thing which has become an issue or a challenge, and they may not directly be related to you or giving you, let's say, helping you in achieving your aims and objectives or your goals and objectives on the personal and professional front. So as long as we are able to classify these activities which are important, and we know which are urgent, we can overcome, the tendency to focus on the unimportant activities, and that allows us to clear, let's say, enough time to do what is essential for our own success. And this is the way that we look at moving forward. And sometimes what we do is you're doing firefighting. We use the term that I'm firefighting, today, because in your position or in your line of work, if something, you're faced with a number of problems, then what you need to do is define what is important and define what is urgent. And then you go about, using the principle and the activities that are defined in such a way to, address them. Otherwise, what tends to happen is you keep firefighting. And what that happens is that basically stress, and this stress then can lead to lower motivation, lower morale, because you feel that although you've been doing a lot of work, but obviously that work is not leading to the completion or fulfillment of your own aims and objectives. And that is where you start feeling frustrated, and you start feeling that, okay, I'm not getting my worth within the organization. So sometimes when we look at defining these activities which are urgent and important, you follow a 4-step process. We talk about them being important and urgent. We talk about them as being important but not urgent. You talk about them as not important but urgent, and then not important and not urgent. So these tend to be, the 4 that we talk about specifically, if I have to bring them across in terms of, the priority, when we talk about the Eisenhower principle. And according to them, what we can do is group these activities and then schedule our activities in such a way, depending on the type of activity or the importance of that activity that we need to do, we can classify them into 4 different priorities. And depending on the priority, we can go about, completing them. Now, the next bit that we talk about is in terms of the, the action priority matrix. So when we talk about this particular matrix, which is action priority matrix, we basically are looking at, discussing things which will allow us to, let's say, divide a big activity into a smaller set of activities, and that would help us prioritize which ones need to be done first and which ones should I look at avoiding, because they will be taking too much of time, and they should be delegated or broken down into smaller activities to be able to assign them to a team. And the third part that we look at is an interesting article which says managing conflicting priorities. And I would suggest that you read this particular article, which is listed on Mind Tools as a website, and it allows you to understand, how do we go about managing conflicting priorities. Now, let's look at, we've understood what is time management, we understood the benefits of it, and then there are some theoretical models in terms of how do we go about, managing time. So first of all, we look at prioritization, and within prioritization, we look at these 3 different theoretical models, which is the Eisenhower urgent important principle, the action priority matrix, and also we can, to a certain extent, look at managing conflicting priorities, to understand this point. Now, the second one that we talk about is scheduling, goal setting, We talk about concentration and focus, and there are some easy time management tips which have been, defined, and provided, which allow us to manage time effectively as far as, one of the strategies is concerned within an organization. Now, scheduling tends to be quite simple. We need to be able to, if there are lots of activities that you do on a day in, day out basis, one of the things that we need to be able to do is basically schedule, those activities in such a way that we know exactly what we are doing, how we are doing, when we are doing. And it is like a scheduling, which is very common activity that we do today normally in all organizations. Is we have a shared calendar, and in that calendar you schedule meetings, you schedule, like for example, if I say UK Versity, we have 3 or 4 different types of calendars, and we do scheduling of teaching sessions, bookings, we do holidays, and obviously looking at standardization and some of the other bits which are all scheduled on a calendar, so that everybody is able to know of these dates, the activities that are going to happen, and they can plan towards them to ensure that they are, they are able to attend those activities for the purposes of their own understanding, development, and obviously training. Goal setting, is one of the important activities that we look at when we look at, managing time. And this is primarily because most successful managers, you would see, is that they set very clear targets. They use SMART goals, which I mentioned earlier, as a template to be able to set goals which are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And this allows them to go about, achieving some of them on a effective basis, on a time-effective basis, essentially. Then we look at concentration and focus. Sometimes it's not good to concentrate on too many activities, doing too many tasks at one time, which is what we call multitasking, and this can have a reverse or an opposite effect. So if you know what tasks are urgent and what tasks are important, then we need to concentrate and focus on those tasks which are important, which are going to directly contribute to the success of my own goals. They need to be prioritized first, and then the urgent tasks which are going to be asking for, say for example, contributions from you as a team player or as a member of the team or a department, and they would need to be looked at from a point of view of, categorizing them under what are called concentration and focus. There are obviously easy time management tips which all managers would give, and they could be: you need to work at your goals, you need to have a to-do list, focus on result, take a lunch break, make sure that you are taking appropriate breaks in between, when you're doing a number of tasks for the day, and you need to be able to prioritize those tasks to understand which are urgent and which are important. Now, one of the things that I would suggest that, I should not put it here, I'll put it in the next slide, is you should always look at focusing on the practice of 4 Ds. And these 4 Ds stands for delete, do, delegate, and defer. Now, this is one of the important tips that I would say that we need to know and be aware of when we talk about time management strategies. Now, the 4 Ds essentially, when we talk about the practice of 4 Ds, what we are looking at essentially is talking about, do, defer, delay, and delegate. And the reason we say this is that this is something that, has been devised over a point in time, and, is widely accepted now as one of the tools which primarily helps managers, do tasks more effectively. Now, when we talk about the 4 Ds, what we are looking at there is talking about doing, that you work on tasks and take a few minutes to complete. Then you look at accomplishing what has been done by, achieving those or doing those tasks. And in those cases, it could be things like, when we are doing is things like, answering an email or returning a phone call or printing a report. So if I just do this first, which is to say, start with do, and they would be doing tasks. So when you come in the morning, first thing most managers would tell you is to answer all your emails, make sure you're returning a phone call if there were any missed calls or voice calls, and then you're basically prioritizing, any things which have got left out yesterday, you want to complete them first and then go on to the other. Then we talk about what is called defer. So these are tasks which you would set aside time and spend, because you would need to basically look at temporarily pausing them so that they can be handled. You need to pause maybe some of your activities currently to be able to handle something which has to be done right away because they are becoming a priority and they have been scheduled maybe by your boss or, in some cases, depending on the availability of your colleagues. And that is where you would look at deferring some of these jobs. So when we say defer, that would also mean delay. And here we are looking at is there's a request which has come in for information from your colleague or from your boss. There's a new project idea which has come up, and what you want to do is defer or delay working on the existing one, because that might not be the brightest idea in terms of what you're looking at doing. And then we come to delegate. So if we talk about delegate here, what we are looking at is primarily looking at delegating or reassigning an essential task to someone else, because you might be incapacitated, you might not be able to work on that because you're working on some other task. And here the idea would be to weigh those tasks that benefit you specifically, and the ones which are not going to benefit you specifically could be delegated to one of your colleagues who is maybe an expert, or maybe somebody who's more tuned to looking at that particular task or solving that situation or delivering that particular outcome. And that is where you would look at delegate. And then you look at delete or drop. So if I put delete or drop and defer or delay, just to make sure that we are able to capture this well. So when we talk about delete or drop, we are looking at removing unnecessary tasks from our schedule, things which are not required, they are not urgent, they are some things which will be picked up by some of the others, or they've become less important priorities. So in this case, things like you might delay or drop or delete or drop unproductive meetings. You don't want to be going to a meeting wherein you are not invited, or this might not be directly related to your work. You might look at deleting unnecessary emails, which or be of no interest to you. For example, you work in a health and social care home and you receive an email which say develop a new website, or talk to us for IT, and those are emails which are of no importance to you, and you could look at deleting or dropping those emails, and that would be termed as delete or drop. So when we talk about these types, we look at again, we can classify them into Eisenhower's, urgent important principle. And when we talk about this in general, that would be something of quite important, because you would want to put this into some sort of a matrix. And that matrix would essentially be the 4 Ds of, time management. So things which are urgent and important, but what you do is basically classify them into a way wherein when you say urgent and important, what you're looking at doing is, essentially categorizing them into these 4 types, and they would then be, things that you would work on depending on whether it's a delay, whether it's a delegate, whether it's a defer, or it's a delete. And they would be useful for you to look at managing one of the, managing your time effectively within the organization, and would be classed as a time management strategy. So I hope this particular, learning outcome and the assessment criteria is also addressed in task 4.3. There are 2 or 3 good articles which I would ask you to go about reading. One is the article on negotiation skills. The other is article on active listening. And the third one, easy time management or time management tips, which have been given on the NHS website, which is a good read for you to understand this particular assessment criteria, which is time management strategies, or the assessment criteria 4.3. So I hope you've enjoyed today's session. And if you have any questions at this stage, I'll be more than happy to take. And you could ask me by unmuting your microphone, or you can ask me through the chat route. And I'll be happy to, if I can't answer them straight away, what I'll be happy to do is basically, send across additional information to you for you to be able to read. And hopefully that should, answer your queries. Okay, that's brilliant. No worries. I'm going to try and catch up with you now tomorrow, which is primarily going to be looking at the assignment discussion session for tomorrow. And that would be same time tomorrow with regards to covering the assignment brief for the personal and professional development unit. Thank you so much for joining, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care and bye for now.